Elara is a young Omega who is cast out of the Ashwood Pack after giving birth to a stillborn son named Asher. Branded as cursed and abandoned while grieving, she survives alone for 3 years in the wilderness, visiting the hollow tree where she buried her child every full moon and releasing heartbreaking howls of grief into the night. Unknown to her alpha king, Kael Blackridge has heard those howls for years and becomes obsessed with finding their source. When he finally discovers Elara living in desperate conditions, he realizes she is his fated mate, but patiently earns her trust instead of forcing a bond. Kael brings her to Blackridge, where she slowly recovers physically and emotionally while their relationship deepens through kindness, companionship, and mutual respect. As Elara heals, her long silent wolf awakens, and she discovers she is one of the legendary moon-touched wolves possessing rare healing powers thought extinct for centuries. While some, including the ambitious Serafina, initially resent her presence, Elara gradually earns the pack's respect. Trouble arrives when her former mate Colton and the Ashwood Pack learn of her powers and attempt to reclaim her for political gain, leading to an alliance of rival packs attacking Blackridge. During the conflict, Elara uses her extraordinary abilities to heal warriors and defend the keep while Kael defeats Colton and exposes his cruelty. On the night of the full moon, beside the hollow tree where Asher rests, Elara and Kael finally complete their mate bond, marking each other and honoring the son she lost. Colton is publicly judged and sentenced to lifelong exile, while Elara is recognized as Blackridge's Luna. Surrounded by a pack that finally values her and a mate who loves both her and the memory of her child, Elara finds healing, belonging, and a future built not on grief but on love, family, and hope. The hollow tree smelled like wet bark and something sweeter underneath something that had long since stopped being a body and become part of the wood itself. Elara pressed her palm against the opening where she had tucked the bundle 3 years ago, and the moss had grown over it so completely that a stranger would never know. But she knew. Her fingers found the edge of the linen she had wrapped him in, now stiff and dark with tannin from the oak, and she lowered herself to her knees in the mud because her legs would not hold her anymore. The full moon hung directly above the clearing, painting everything in that blue-white light that made the forest look like it was holding its breath. She opened her mouth. The howl that came out was not a wolf's howl. It could not be. Her wolf had gone silent the night the pup came out. Wrong came out, still came out with a face so perfect she had counted all 10 fingers twice before she understood he was not breathing. The sound she made was something between a human scream and the low keen of an animal caught in wire, and it tore through the trees and scattered a pair of owls from the branches above. 3 years she had been doing this every full moon, the same clearing, the same tree, the same sound that emptied her chest until there was nothing left but the ache in her ribs. She did not know that 4 miles east in the stone keep of the Blackridge Pack, the Alpha King stood at his window with his hands braced on the sill, listening to her grief carry across the valley like smoke. Elara wiped her face with the back of her hand and tasted salt and the iron tang of the scratch on her cheek where a branch had caught her on the way through the undergrowth. She pulled her coat tighter. It was not really a coat, it was a quilted blanket she had stitched into something with sleeves because the coat she had owned before had been taken from her along with everything else when the Ashwood Pack had cast her out. Cast her out was the polite version. What they had done was drag her to the eastern border while she was still bleeding, still leaking milk that had nowhere to go, and leave her at the tree line with nothing but the clothes on her back and the bundle in her arms. The bundle that was already cold. She had buried him here because it was the only place that felt like it belonged to no one. Neutral ground, unclaimed territory between 2 packs where the patrols rarely came and the deer moved freely because no wolves hunted here. She had dug the hole with her bare hands. And when the hole was not deep enough, she had found this tree with its split trunk and its hollow center, and she had placed him inside and covered the opening with stones. Then she had torn up handfuls of moss and packed it over the stones until it looked like the tree had always been that way. The Ashwood Pack had not come looking for her. She had not expected them to. An Omega who birthed a dead pup was worse than useless. She was bad luck, she was cursed, she was proof Elder Soren had said at the tribunal that some bloodlines should not continue. Elder Soren, who had a tremor in his left hand that he hid by keeping it in his pocket. Elder Soren, who had once left a cup of broth outside her door the winter she had pneumonia before the pup, before the disgrace, and had never mentioned it and never done it again. She sometimes wondered if he remembered. She stood up slowly, her knees popped. She was 24 years old, and her knees popped like a woman twice her age because she had spent the last 3 years sleeping in a lean-to she had built against a rock face on a bed of pine needles that did nothing to stop the cold from seeping up through the ground and into her bones. She survived by foraging dandelion greens in spring berries in summer nuts and dried mushrooms in fall. And in winter, she set snares for rabbits and ate them half raw because building a fire risked drawing attention. She had become something less than a member of any pack and something more than a rogue. Rogues were wolves who had chosen to leave. She had not chosen anything. She had simply been discarded. The walk back to her lean-to took 40 minutes. She moved carefully, stepping on roots and stones to minimize her tracks in the mud, a habit that had become instinct. The lean-to was tucked into a fold in the hillside where two boulders met at an angle, and she had layered branches and bark over the gap until it was almost waterproof. Almost. When it rained hard, water still found its way through and pooled in the corner where she kept her small stash of dried chamomile and yarrow, which she collected because they were the only medicine she had. She crawled inside and pulled the deerskin flap down behind her. The space was barely large enough to lie down in. It smelled like pine resin and damp earth and the faintly sour scent of her own unwashed skin, though she bathed in the creek when the weather allowed it. She had lost weight she could not afford to lose. Her collarbone stood out like a shelf. Her wrists were so thin she could circle one with the thumb and forefinger of the opposite hand. She closed her eyes and pressed her face into the pile of dried grass she used as a pillow. And she thought about the pup. She always thought about the pup after the full moon visit. He would have been 3 now. Walking, talking, probably running, probably driving her insane the way toddlers did, pulling things off shelves and putting rocks in his mouth. She would have named him Asher after no one because she wanted him to belong to himself. Sleep came eventually, but it was shallow and filled with the kind of dreams that were really just memories wearing different clothes. She woke before dawn to the sound of boots, not one pair, several, moving through the underbrush with the particular rhythm of wolves in human form who were not trying to be quiet because they did not need to. This was the gait of people who expected the forest to move out of their way. Elara was on her feet before she was fully awake, her hand closing around the sharpened stick she kept by the entrance. It was a poor weapon, she knew that, but holding it made the panic recede from a roar to a hum. Through a gap in the bark layering she could see them, 4 figures moving through the pre-dawn gray, and even in the low light she could tell they were not Ashwood. The Ashwood wolves wore rough spun and leather. These figures wore black, and their movements had a military precision that made her stomach drop. Their cloaks bore an insignia she could not quite make out, but she did not need to see it clearly, she knew from the stories. Blackridge. The Blackridge Pack was the largest and most powerful territory in the northern provinces, and their alpha King Kael Blackridge was the kind of figure people discussed in whispers. He had taken the throne at 19 after killing his own father in a challenge which was either an act of justice or an act of savagery, depending on who was telling the story. His father had been a tyrant, that part was not disputed. What people argued about was whether the son was any different. Elara held her breath. If they were a border patrol, they would pass through. This stretch of forest was unclaimed, there was nothing here for them to find. But they were not passing through, they had stopped. The tallest of the 4, a woman with close-cropped red hair and a long sword strapped across her back, held up a fist and the others halted. She turned in a slow circle, her nostrils flaring, scenting. They were scenting the air, and Elara realized with a sick lurch that they were scenting her. 3 years of living rough had not erased her. She still smelled like something like someone, and the wind had just shifted. The red-haired woman's eyes locked onto the hillside, onto the lean-to, onto the gap in the bark where Elara was watching. Elara did the only thing she could think to do. She dropped the stick and ran. She made it 11 steps before something hit her from the side. Not a person, a body of air, a pressure wave that came with a sound like a crack of thunder in a clear sky. She went down hard, her cheek hitting the dirt pine needles pressing into her skin. She could not move. Not because she was held down, but because something had locked her muscles in place, a force she had never felt before. Heavy and absolute, like the forest itself, had decided she should stop. An alpha command, but not from any of the 4 soldiers. They had not spoken. The command had come from somewhere deeper in the trees, from a voice that had not used words at all, only will. She heard him before she saw him. The footsteps were unhurried, each one pressed into the earth with a weight that suggested someone much larger than a normal man. And then a pair of boots entered her field of vision, black leather scuffed at the toe with mud on the soles. And above them, legs clad in dark trousers. And above that, a torso in a worn black shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms roped with muscle and marked with old scars, the kind made by claws, not blades. He crouched down, and Elara looked up into the face of the Alpha King. He was not handsome the way the stories suggested. Handsome implied something polished, something pleasant. Kael Blackridge's face was carved from harsher material, a jaw that looked like it had been broken and healed slightly off-center. A nose with a ridge in the bridge. Dark hair cut short as if he had done it himself with a knife and not cared about the result. But his eyes were amber true, amber, the color of pine sap held up to sunlight. And they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her rib cage feel too small for her lungs. His nostrils flared. She saw it happen, the exact moment the scent hit him. His pupils dilated until the amber was just a ring, and something shifted in his expression. Something tectonic, as if a wall he had built inside himself cracked from foundation to roofline in a single breath. His hand reached out. She flinched. He paused, his fingers hovering an inch from her face, close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin but not the touch. "Who?" he said, and his voice was low and rough like gravel turning over in a riverbed. He stopped, started again. "Who put that scratch on your face?" It was not a question, not really. It was a command for information delivered in the tone of a man who intended to destroy whoever was responsible. "A branch," she whispered. "It was a branch." Something flickered behind his eyes, the alpha command released, and her muscles unlocked so suddenly she gasped. He stayed crouched in front of her, one knee in the dirt, and he did not move his hand away. "You are the one," he said. "The one who howls." The blood drained from her face. He had heard her. All those nights she thought she was alone in her grief, screaming into the empty dark, he had heard her. The humiliation of it was so sharp it felt physical. A blade slid between her ribs. Every full moon, he said, and his voice had changed. The gravel was still there, but beneath it was something else, something that sounded almost like it hurt him. "For 3 years, my wolf would not let me sleep. He paced the length of my chambers and clawed at the walls. I thought I was going mad." She stared at him. She could not speak. "I sent scouts to find the source," he continued. "Twice a year, then every season, then every month. They found nothing. You are very good at hiding." "I had to be," she said before she could stop herself. His jaw tightened. She watched the muscle work beneath his skin. "From whom? Everyone." He was quiet for a long time. Behind him, the red-haired soldier and the other 3 stood at a distance, their faces carefully blank in the way of people who have just witnessed something they know they should not comment on. Kael Blackridge stood. He was enormous. She had known intellectually that Alpha Kings tended to be large, but knowing it and lying on the ground at his feet while he rose to his full height were different experiences entirely. He blocked out the lightning sky behind him. He extended his hand. She didn't take it. She could not take it because taking it meant something, and she had spent 3 years learning that the things people offered could be taken away. "I will not hurt you," he said. "You do not know that." He tilted his head. The amber eyes narrowed slightly, and something that might have been respect passed through them. "No," he said. "I suppose I do not, but my wolf knows. He has known since the first howl, the mate bond." She had felt it too the moment she had looked into his face, the impossible pull in her chest like a fishhook lodged behind her sternum, dragging her toward him. But she had buried one child in a hollow tree and mourned him alone for 3 years, and she had learned that the things her body told her could not always be trusted. "I have nothing," she said. "I am no one's. I am Omega. My pack cast me out because I birthed a dead pup, and they said I was cursed. I live in a hole in the ground, and I eat rabbits I catch with wire, and I howl at the moon like a madwoman because it is the only time I let myself remember that I used to be more than this. If your wolf thinks I am his mate, your wolf is mistaken." She had never said that many words in a row to anyone not in 3 years. Her throat burned. Kael looked at her for a long time. Then he shrugged off his cloak, a heavy thing lined with dark fur still warm from his body, and he laid it on the ground beside her, not on her, beside her where she could reach it if she chose to. "My wolf is not mistaken," he said. "But I will not force you. The cloak is yours whether you come with me or stay. The food Nessa is about to bring you is yours as well, and if you stay, I will come back tomorrow and the day after and every day until you tell me your name or until you tell me to leave and mean it." The red-haired woman, Nessa, was already kneeling to open a pack, pulling out wrapped bundles that smelled like bread and smoked meat. Elara's stomach cramped so violently she bent double. "Eat," Kael said. He turned to his soldiers. "We make camp at the ridge, half-mile distance." He looked back at her. "She will not be watched. She will not be followed. If she runs, she runs." Then he walked away. And Elara was left on the forest floor with a cloak that smelled like cedar and wood smoke, and something underneath those scents that made her chest ache. Something warm and alive that her silent wolf stirred for just barely like an animal lifting its head in sleep. She ate the bread first. It was sourdough dense and slightly warm, and the first bite made her eyes water because she had forgotten what real bread tasted like. The smoked meat was venison peppered and salted, and she ate it too fast and had to stop because her shrunken stomach revolted. She wrapped the rest in the cloth and pressed it to her chest like something precious. She did not touch the cloak, not that night. She touched it the next night when the temperature dropped and frost formed on the inside of her lean-to. And she woke shivering so hard her teeth clacked. She pulled it over herself, and the warmth was immediate and enveloping, and it smelled like him, and she cried silently because warmth had become the kind of luxury that made her weep. He came back the next day, as he had said he would. He sat on a fallen log 20 feet from her lean-to, and he did not approach. He had brought more food. This time there was cheese and apples and a small clay jar of honey. "My name is Kael," he said, as if she did not know, as if every wolf in 6 provinces did not know. She said nothing. He sat for an hour. He did not speak again. He simply sat, and when the hour was done, he stood, inclined his head slightly, and left. The 3rd day the same, the 4th day the same. But on the 4th day, he brought something different along with the food. A bar of soap, hard milled, scented faintly with lavender, wrapped in brown paper. She almost laughed. It was such a practical thing, such a human thing in the middle of what was supposed to be an epic mate-bond courtship. Not jewels or promises. Soap. "I'm not trying to say you smell bad," he said. And the corner of his mouth moved in a way that might have been humor, though it looked like his face was not entirely sure how to do it. "I do smell bad," she said. It was the first word she had spoken to him since the first day. He leaned forward slightly. "You smell like mine," he said, and his voice dropped into a register that vibrated in her bones. "Underneath the dirt and the pine and the grief, you smell like mine. My wolf has not stopped pacing since I left you." She looked at the soap in her hands. "Elara," she said. "My name is Elara." Something happened to his face. It was not a smile, it was something more fundamental, as if the bones of his expression rearranged themselves. And for a moment the feared Alpha King looked like a man who had been given water after a long time in the desert. "Elara," he repeated. He said it carefully, as if learning the shape of it. "Will you tell me about the pup?" And she did. She did not mean to. She meant to say nothing, or to say just enough to make him understand why she could not be what he wanted. But something about the way he sat there, still and patient, not reaching for her, not demanding just present, cracked the seal she had kept on it. She told him about the pregnancy, how it had been unexpected. She had been with a beta in the Ashwood Pack, a man named Colton, who had seemed kind enough until the pregnancy made him less kind. He had not wanted a pup. When she would not end the pregnancy, he had told the pack she had seduced him with dark magic to trap him. The pack had believed him because it was easier to believe that an omega was a manipulator than to believe that a beta was a coward. She told him about the birth, how she had labored alone in her small room because no one would attend an omega's birth, how the midwife had come eventually but only because pack law required it, and how the midwife's face when the pup came out silent had been not horror but something worse. Confirmation. As if she had expected this. As if a cursed omega could only produce a cursed child. She told him about the tree, how she had walked for miles with the bundle against her chest still warm from her body, and how the warmth had faded gradually and she had felt it leave, and how that slow cooling was the worst part because it happened by degrees, each degree a fresh loss. She was not crying. She had used up her tears a long time ago. She told it flatly the way she might describe the weather, and that flatness was somehow worse than sobbing. Kael did not move through any of it. When she finished, the silence stretched between them like a held breath, and then he said, "Show me." "What, the tree? Show me where you put him." She stared at him. No one had ever asked to see. No one had ever acknowledged that the pup had existed at all except as evidence of her failure. They walked to the hollow tree together. The sun was low, casting long amber light through the canopy, and the forest floor was carpeted in last year's leaves, damp and dark. Elara stopped in front of the tree and pointed to the moss-covered opening. Kael knelt. He pressed his hand to the bark the way she always did. And she watched his fingers spread wide across the rough surface, scarred knuckles against ancient wood. He closed his eyes. "Asher," she said, because he should know the name. "Asher," Kael repeated. He was quiet for a full minute. When he opened his eyes, they were wet. He did not wipe them. He did not look away. He simply let the tears sit on his face as if they had earned the right to be there. He deserved better. Kael said. "So did you. Better does not exist for omegas. It does now." He stood. He did not reach for her. He never reached for her first, but his eyes held hers, and there was something in them that she hadn't seen directed at herself in so long she almost didn't recognize it. It was not pity. Pity was a coin tossed at a beggar. This was something heavier, something that cost the giver. This was witnessing. "Come with me to Blackridge," he said. "Not as my mate, not yet. Come as my guest. Eat food that someone else has cooked. Sleep in a room with a door that locks from the inside. Let a healer look at you because your breathing is shallow and I have been counting and you take 19 breaths a minute when the normal is 14. And that means something is wrong with your lungs." She blinked. He had been counting her breaths. "I will provide you a room and a stipend and you will owe me nothing. If you want to leave, you leave. I will have Nessa show you the door myself, and if I stay, then I will court you properly, with patience, which my wolf hates, by the way. He is currently trying to claw his way out of my chest, and I would appreciate it if you would make a decision before he succeeds." This time she did laugh. It was a broken sound, rusty from disuse, but it was real. And when it happened, Kael's whole body went still. The way a predator goes still when it spots prey, except this was the opposite of predatory. He looked stunned. He looked like the sound of her laugh had reached into his chest and rearranged something vital. "Okay," she said. Blackridge Keep was nothing like Ashworth. Ashworth had been a sprawling compound of wooden longhouses and muddy paths, always slightly too cold, always smelling of smoke and the sour tang of the tanning sheds. Blackridge was stone, gray granite that turned amber in the afternoon light, built into the side of a mountain so that the keep seemed to grow from the rock itself. The main hall had a ceiling high enough to lose in shadow, and the hearths, there were 3 of them, were large enough for a grown man to stand inside. The room Kael gave her was on the 3rd floor. It had a bed with an actual mattress stuffed with wool and clean linen sheets that smelled of dried rosemary because the launderer tucked sprigs between the folds. There was a chair by the window, a table with a basin for washing a lock on the inside of the door, just as he had promised. Elara stood in the center of this room and turned in a slow circle, and the enormity of it, a room of her own, a door that locked clean sheets, overwhelmed her so completely that she had to sit down on the floor because her knees gave out again. Not from weakness this time, from something else. Something she did not have a word for. The healer came the next morning. Her name was Marin, a small woman with gray-streaked braids and hands that smelled like calendula oil, and she examined Elara with a brisk gentleness that suggested she had seen worse and would not judge. Malnourished Marin said, ticking off items on her fingers. Anemic early-stage pneumonia in the left lung, 3 healed rib fractures that set badly, muscle wasting in the legs, possible parasitic infection from uncooked game. She paused. "And your wolf? What about my wolf?" Marin's eyes softened. "She is not gone child, she is grieving. A wolf who loses a pup sometimes retreats so far inside that the human thinks she has died. But she is there. I can feel her, barely, like a heartbeat at the bottom of a well." Elara pressed her hand to her sternum. She had assumed the silence was permanent. She had assumed the wolf was dead. The idea that she was merely deep, merely grieving, merely waiting, made her throat close. Marin left her with a regimen, bone broth 3 times a day fortified with iron filings and dried nettle, a poultice for the lungs, rest. And Kael came, every day, always at the same time late afternoon when the light in her room turned gold. He knocked. He waited for her to answer. He never entered without permission. He would sit in the chair by the window and she would sit on the bed and they would talk or not talk depending on what she could manage. He told her about Blackridge, how the pack was 1,200 strong, the largest in the north, responsible for holding the mountain passes against the rogues and the occasional incursion from the southern territories. How he had killed his father because his father had been killing the pack slowly through cruelty and paranoia, executing anyone he suspected of disloyalty until the dungeons were more populated than the barracks. "I was 19, he said. I challenged him in the Great Hall. He laughed. He thought I was too young." Kael's hand went to a scar on his forearm, long and ragged, running from wrist to elbow. He was wrong about many things. That was the last. "Do you regret it? Killing him, yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I regret that it was necessary. I do not regret that it happened. There is a difference, and it is a difference I have not yet fully made peace with." She found herself looking forward to these visits. Then she found herself leaving the door unlocked before he knocked and then leaving it open. And then sitting in the chair by the window so that he had to sit on the bed, which was closer, which meant she could smell him better. Cedar and wood smoke and that unnamed thing underneath. 3 weeks passed. Her breathing improved. She gained weight. The color returned to her face, and Myra noted with satisfaction that the anemia was responding to treatment. The pneumonia cleared, but the pack was watching. She had known they would. A strange Omega in the Alpha King's quarters, given food and shelter and the personal attention of the Alpha himself. Tongues wagged. Of course they did. Most of the pack was indifferent or cautiously welcoming, but there was one who was neither. Serafina Voss was the daughter of Blackridge's former beta, a woman who had been raised to expect that she would one day be the Alpha's Luna. She was beautiful in the way that weapons are beautiful, all sharp lines and polished surfaces, and she carried herself with the particular confidence of someone who has never been told no by anyone who mattered. She had dark hair that fell in a sheet to her waist and eyes like polished obsidian. And when she smiled, it didn't reach past her cheekbones. The first time they met in the Great Hall during the evening meal, Serafina looked at Elara with an expression of such thorough assessment that Elara felt like a horse being evaluated at market. "So you are the stray," Serafina said. Not with cruelty exactly, with a kind of clinical detachment that was somehow worse. "I'm a guest of the Alpha King, yes." Serafina's eyes moved over Elara's frame, lingering on the two thin wrists, the still gaunt face. How charitable of him. She walked away. It should not have stung. Elara had endured far worse than a well-dressed woman's contempt. But it stung anyway because for 3 weeks she had been starting to feel like a person again. And Serafina's gaze had reminded her that to some, she would always be a stray. That night, Kael appeared at her door earlier than usual. His jaw was tight. "What did Serafina say to you? Nothing worth repeating, Elara." "She called me a stray. It is not inaccurate." He made a sound in his chest that was not a growl and not a word, something between something that his wolf contributed to. "You are not a stray. You are my mate, and she knows it, and every wolf in this keep knows it, and the only person who has not accepted it is you. Maybe I need more time. You can have all the time that exists." His voice was strained, and she realized with a start that this was hard for him. Not the patience itself, but the wanting. He wanted her with an intensity she could feel like heat from a furnace, and he was holding it back with both hands, and the effort was visible in the tension of his shoulders and the white of his knuckles where he gripped the doorframe. "Your wolf," she said softly. "Is he angry?" "He is in agony. He wants to mark you. He wants to carry you to our bed and never let you leave and feed you with his own hands and snarl at anyone who looks at you too long. He is not a subtle creature. And what do you want? Not your wolf, you." He looked at her, and the amber eyes were unguarded for the first time. "I want to hear you laugh again. Like you did in the forest. I have been chasing that sound in my head for weeks." She stepped aside. He came in. They did not touch that night. They sat on the floor for some reason, backs against the bed, shoulders close but not quite meeting. And she told him about the things she missed, not the big things, the small ones, the feel of kneading bread dough, the sound of rain on a proper roof, the weight of a book in her hands. She had loved to read before. The Ashwood Pack's library had been small, just 2 shelves in the Longhouse common room, but she had read every volume 3 times. He listened. And the next morning, when she opened her door, there was a stack of books on the threshold, 8 of them, their spines cracked, their pages soft with use. A note on top in handwriting that was surprisingly neat for a man his size. "These are from my personal collection. The one on top is terrible. I could not finish it. Tell me if you can." She read it in a day. It was in fact terrible. A overwrought romance about a princess and a knight written by someone who had clearly never met either. She left it outside his study door with a note, "You were right." The knight is the worst person in this book, and I believe the author intended him to be the hero. His response appeared an hour later, slid under her door, "I knew you had good judgment. Now read the 3rd one in the stack. It will make you angry in a different and more satisfying way." This was how they fell in love. Not through grand gestures or declarations, through books and arguments about books, through his daily visits that stretched from an hour to 2 to 3. Through the morning, she found him in the training yard and watched him spar with Nessa, all brutal efficiency, his body a weapon he wielded with frightening precision, and then watched him cross the yard toward her and become gentle as if he had flipped a switch, his bloody knuckles hanging at his sides, his voice soft when he said good morning. Through the evening, she cried, and he sat beside her and said nothing, only pressed his shoulder against hers until the warmth of him seeped through her clothing and into her skin. She had not told him what the crying was about. She did not need to. It was the pup. It was always the pup. The grief came in waves, unpredictable, and sometimes the waves were tsunamis. A month and a half in her wolf stirred. It happened at dinner of all times. The great hall was full, the hearths roaring, the noise of 200 wolves eating and talking filling the cavernous space. Elara was sitting at a table near the back as she preferred eating venison stew and trying to ignore the stares when a fight broke out at the Alpha's table. 2 young warriors, barely more than boys, lunging at each other over some perceived insult. Chairs overturned, a bowl of stew went flying. The hall erupted in shouts, some encouraging, some alarmed, and then one of the boys shifted his body, twisting into wolf form with a sickening crack of bone, and the other boy scrambled backward with blood already sheeting from a gash on his arm. Kael was on his feet, his alpha command hit the room like a physical force, and every wolf in the hall flinched except Elara. She was already moving. She did not decide to move. Her body moved on its own, carried by something deep and instinctive, and she was across the hall in seconds, her hands on the bleeding boy's arm, her palms pressed to the wound. Light, pale, silver-white light spilling from between her fingers like moonlight trapped in water. It poured into the wound, and the skin knitted together under her hands, the gash sealing itself as if someone were drawing a zipper across torn fabric. The hall went silent. Elara stared at her own hands. The light faded. The boy's arm was whole, the skin unmarked, and inside her chest, deep inside, something moved, not a stirring this time, a rising. Her wolf, climbing up from the bottom of the well where she had been hiding for 3 years, climbing toward the light with a strength that made Elora's entire body shake. She looked up. Every eye in the hall was on her, and across the room, Kael Blackridge was staring at her with an expression that contained multitudes, shock, and recognition, and a fierce, blazing pride that burned in his amber eyes like actual flame. It was Marin who broke the silence. The healer had been eating at a side table, and now she was on her feet, her face drained of color. Moon-touched. She whispered, "By the old gods, she's moon-touched. Moon-touched. A bloodline so rare it had been thought extinct. Descendants of the first wolves blessed by the moon goddess with the ability to heal and to command the grief of the dead. The last known, moon-touched wolf had died 200 years ago. Their power was legendary, their blood sacred. And Elora, the discarded Omega, the mad howling woman in the forest, the mother of a dead pup buried in a hollow tree, was one of them. The room exploded. Questions, exclamations, the low buzz of wolves reassessing everything they thought they knew. Elora stood in the center of it with her glowing hands and her resurrected wolf, and she felt for the first time in 3 years not exposed but expanded as if her skin had been too small for her all along and was finally beginning to fit. Kael crossed the room. The crowd parted for him the way water parts for the prow of a ship. He stopped in front of her closer than he had ever stood. "You healed him," he said. "I did not know I could do that."
"Your wolf is back." Yes. And it was true. She could feel her a warm presence in her chest like a coal that had been banked and was now beginning to glow. Not fully awake yet, but awake enough. "Elara," his voice was rough, "I need to tell you something. What I'm about to do, something I promised I would not do." He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss, it was a claiming his mouth on hers with a desperate precision. One hand cupping the back of her head, the other gripping her waist, pulling her against him. She felt the mate bond snap taut between them, like a bowstring vibrating with a resonance that she felt in every cell. And her wolf howled inside her. Not with grief this time, but with recognition. With homecoming. When he pulled back, his pupils were blown wide and his breathing was ragged and the amber of his eyes had gone molten. "I apologize," he said, not sounding apologetic at all. "My wolf overpowered my better judgment." "Your wolf has good judgment," she said, and kissed him back. In the weeks that followed, things changed rapidly. Marin worked with Elara to understand the scope of her abilities. The healing was the most obvious. But there were other things. She could sense emotion through touch, reading pain and fear and joy through the skin like braille. She could calm a distressed wolf with her presence alone. And on the full moon, when she went to the hollow tree as she always did, the howl she released was different. It was not grief or alone. It was grief and power, grief and light, and it shook the leaves from the branches above her and echoed across the valley in a way that made every wolf within 5 miles stop and listen. Kael went with her now. He stood beside the tree and placed his hand on the bark, and he said the name Asher the way he did every time, as if the pup was still a person and not a memory. But not everyone was pleased. Serafina Voss had watched the Great Hall incident with careful eyes, and what she saw was not a miracle but a threat. If Elara was moon-touched, she was not merely a stray Omega. She was the most valuable wolf in the northern provinces, and if she became Luna, became Queen Serafina's carefully maintained position as the pack's most eligible female would evaporate like mist. She began with small cruelties, a whisper campaign. Elara was dangerous, unstable, had been cast out for good reason. The dead pup was not a tragedy, but a warning. Dark magic, some said. The kind of power that heals can also harm. Elara heard the whispers.
She tried to ignore them, but they found their way under her skin the way cold finds its way through cracked walls, not all at once, but constantly, persistently, until the chill is everywhere. Then Serafina did something unexpected. Elara was in the library, a proper library, 3 full walls of books, the pride of Blackridge Keep, when Serafina entered. Elara tensed, expecting the usual veiled hostility, but Serafina's face was different. The polished surface was cracked, and underneath it was something ragged. "My mother died when I was 9, Serafina said without preamble. She sat down at the table across from Elara, folding her hands in front of her with the careful precision of someone holding themselves together. "My father raised me to be Luna. It was all I had, the only thing that gave my life shape. When Kael took the throne and did not choose me, I told myself he was waiting, that he would come around. I have been telling myself that for 7 years. She paused. Her jaw worked. "I do not say this so you will feel sorry for me. I say this so you will understand that what I am is not the sum of my cruelty, it is the sum of my fear. There is a difference, though. I realize it does not feel like one from your side." Elara said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "What do you want, Serafina? I want to stop being afraid. I do not know how." She stood abruptly as if she had used up all her courage and walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused without turning around. "The whispers, I can stop them. Some of them, the ones I started." Then she left, and Elara sat alone in the library with the smell of old paper and binding glue, and she thought about how cruelty and grief were sometimes the same animal wearing different skins. Serafina did stop the whispers, not all of them. She had not lied, but enough of them that the temperature in the keep shifted and the looks Elara received became more curious than hostile. It was not enough to stop what came next. Word had traveled beyond Blackridge, beyond the northern provinces, down into the lowlands and the southern territories where a different kind of power held sway. The Ashwood Pack heard that their discarded Omega was moon-touched, that she lived in the Alpha King's Keep, that she might become Luna. And Colton the Beta, who had fathered the pup and then discarded them both, began to feel something he had not felt in 3 years: regret. Not for what he had done, but for what he had lost. A moon-touched mate was worth more than gold, more than territory. She was a strategic asset, and he had thrown her away. He went to Elder Soren. Elder Soren sat in his study, the one with the walnut desk and the smell of old pipe tobacco and the window that overlooked the training grounds, and he listened to Colton's proposal with his trembling left hand hidden in his pocket. "You want to reclaim her," Soren said. "She was mine first. Pack law gives me standing." Soren was quiet. His right hand, the steady one, turned a pen over and over on the desk surface. Colton stood before him with the particular confidence of a man who has mistaken entitlement for virtue. And Soren studied him and thought about the cup of broth he had left outside a sick girl's door years ago and how he had never done it again and how the not doing it again had been a choice he had made every single day since. "Pack law gives you nothing," Soren said. "You rejected her. The bond was dissolved by your own declaration. She is a free wolf. Then we take her by force. Blackridge is strong, but we have allies. The southern packs would love an excuse to challenge the Alpha King." Soren looked at Colton for a long time, then he picked up his pen and began to write. A letter, not to the southern packs, to Blackridge. The letter arrived by hawk 3 days later. Nessa brought it to Kael's study, where he and Elara were arguing about the 3rd book in the stack, the one he had promised would make her angry, and it had, but not for the reasons he expected. Kael read the letter. His face did not change. That was how Elara knew it was bad. When things were merely problematic, his jaw tightened. When things were truly dangerous, he went perfectly, terrifyingly still. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the letter. She read Elder Soren's neat, cramped handwriting. Colton was raising an alliance, 4 packs, including 2 from the south, united under the pretense of challenging Blackridge's territorial claims, but really coming for her. They wanted the moon-touched Omega. They wanted the power she represented. "He warns us," Kael said, nodding at the letter. "Soren, he could have said nothing. He left me broth once," Elara said quietly. "When I was sick, before everything." Kael looked at her. Something complicated moved behind his eyes. One act of kindness does not erase complicity. No. But it means the complicity cost him something. Kael began to pace. It was the first time she had seen him move without purpose, and it unsettled her. He moved like a caged animal, all coiled energy and no outlet. "They will come in 10 days, he said, maybe less. Colton is not smart enough to organize this alone. Someone is backing him, someone with resources. What do? We prepare. He stopped pacing, he turned to her. And I need to ask you something. I have no right to ask. What? Will you let me mark you? The air between them changed. Marking was permanent, a bite on the neck, an exchange of essence, a bond that could not be broken except by death. It was not a wedding, it was deeper than a wedding. It was a fusing of wolves, of souls, of futures. If they come and you are unmarked, Kael said, his voice carefully controlled, Colton has standing to challenge. Pack law is murky on dissolved bonds, but if you are marked, you are mine legally, spiritually, irrevocably. No claim can supersede a completed bond. So this is strategy no. He crossed the room. He stood in front of her, close enough to touch, but not touching, never touching first. This is me asking you to be mine, not for strategy, not for protection, because every night I walk back to my chambers from your door and my wolf howls the entire way, and I am tired, Elara. I am tired of sleeping alone when you are 30 feet down the hall. I am tired of pretending that patience is a virtue and not a form of slow torture. She looked up at him. She thought about the hollow tree, about the pup she had buried there alone with no one to help her grieve. She thought about the 3 years of cold and hunger and silence. She thought about the mate bond, that fishhook in her chest, and how it had evolved from a pull into something else entirely, something that felt less like a leash and more like a root system, something that had grown into the ground of her and now held her upright. Not tonight, she said. He nodded. His face did not fall. He had meant it when he said he would wait. On the full moon, she said, at the tree, where Asher is, I want him to be part of it. Kael's eyes went bright. The full moon is in 4 days. Then we have 4 days to prepare for a war and a marking. I have fought wars before. The marking terrifies me more. She smiled. It was not the broken, rusty thing from the forest. It was new. Good. You should be terrified. I am told I bite hard. He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh. Truly laugh, and it was a sound like rocks shifting in a riverbed, deep and surprising and full of unexpected warmth. The next 4 days were a blur of preparation. Kael mobilized Blackridge's forces, calling in patrols from the outer territories and reinforcing the mountain passes. Nessa commanded the eastern garrison. 200 warriors, the pack's best positioned along the ridgeline where the most likely approach lay. Elara worked with Mourned in the healer's wing, learning to control and direct the moon-touched power that still came to her unpredictably, sometimes surging when she was calm and vanishing when she was stressed. Marin theorized that the power was tied to her emotional state, that grief had been its catalyst, and grief still governed its flow. You do not merely heal flesh, Marin said, holding Elara's wrists and studying the faint silver luminescence that pulsed beneath her skin. You heal the break between body and spirit. When the boy's arm was cut, the wound was not just physical, it was a separation. Your power bridges separations. It mends what has been torn apart. Can it mend anything? Mourned looked at her with old, careful eyes. I think that depends on whether the thing wants to be mended. On the 3rd day, a scout returned with news. The alliance was moving faster than expected. 500 wolves, not 400, marching through the eastern lowlands. They would reach Blackridge's border by nightfall of the full moon. Kael received this news in the war room, a stone chamber with maps covering every surface and the smell of candle wax and iron. His generals stood around the central table, the great map of the northern territories spread before them with carved wooden markers representing troop positions. They will hit the eastern pass at dawn, Nessa said, moving a cluster of markers. It is the widest approach, and they have numbers. We hold the high ground, said another general, a grizzled wolf named Thorn, whose left ear was missing.
Numbers matter less when the terrain favors the defender. They will expect us to hold the pass, Kael said. He was studying the map with the focused intensity of a man reading the future in the topology, which means they will feint east and push the real force through the northern ravine. The ravine is impassable, Thorn said. No, it is difficult. That is not the same thing. Kael placed a marker in the ravine. Nessa, take 50 of your best through the ravine tonight. Set positions on the cliff face. When they come, and they will come, let them enter the narrows before you strike. Nessa nodded. Elara had learned that no one questioned Kael's tactical instincts. He had fought 17 engagements in his 9 years as Alpha King and had lost none of them. That night, the night before the full moon, Elara could not sleep. She sat in her room with one of Kael's books open on her lap, unread, staring at the wall. The fear was a physical thing. It sat in her stomach like a stone. A knock at her door. She opened it. Kael stood there in the hallway in the middle of the night in nothing but loose trousers and the scarred expanse of his bare torso. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were bright. I could not sleep either, he said.
She stepped aside. He came in, he on the floor back against the bed the way they always did, and she sat beside him, and their shoulders touched. I am afraid, she said, of the battle, of losing this. She gestured vaguely at the room at him at the space between them. I had nothing for so long that having something makes me feel like I am carrying glass. He turned his head. He looked at her. You are not carrying glass. You are carrying granite. You have been carrying it so long you forgot what it was and you mistook its weight for fragility. She leaned into him. His arm came around her. His skin was warm, impossibly warm, the elevated temperature of an alpha wolf. And she pressed her face into his shoulder and breathed him in. Cedar. Wood smoke. The unnamed thing that was simply him. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow. They did not sleep. They sat against the bed until the sky turned gray, and he told her about his mother who had died when he was 12, who had smelled like rosemary and had laughed at things that were not funny, which made them funny, and whose death had hardened his father from a stern man into a cruel one. And she told him about the dreams she still had of the pup, the recurring one where Asher was alive and laughing and running toward her across a field of white flowers, and how she always woke up just before his hand reached hers. At dawn, he kissed her forehead and went to war. The Battle of the Eastern Pass began at mid-morning when the Alliance's advance force, 200 wolves in mixed formation, crested the ridge and met Blackridge's defensive line. The sound carried to the keep a distant cacophony of snarls and clashing bodies that made Elara's newly awakened wolf press against the inside of her chest. She was in the healer's wing. Marin had set up triage stations, rows of cots and tables of supplies, and the first wounded began arriving within the hour. Cuts bites a broken collarbone, a warrior with a punctured lung who was drowning in his own blood. Elara put her hands on him. The silver light came steadier now, responding to her will rather than her panic. She felt the separation Marin had described, the place where the blade had torn lung from rib, breath from body, and she poured the light into that gap and felt it close. The warrior gasped, coughed, breathed. More wounded came and more and more. Elara moved from cot to cot, her hands glowing, her wolf feeding her strength, and she healed them. Not all of them. Some were too far gone, and the light could not bridge a separation that had already completed. 2 wolves died under her hands, and she felt each death as a small cold collapse inside her chest. But most lived. Wounds closed, bones knit, lungs inflated. The healer's wing, which should have been a charnel house, became instead a place of impossible recovery. And the warriors who walked back out to rejoin the fight carried with them the knowledge that a moon-touched wolf was behind the line, and they fought harder because of it. Meanwhile, in the northern ravine, Nessa's ambush worked precisely as Kael had predicted. 300 Alliance wolves poured through the narrow passage and found themselves trapped between cliff walls with Blackridge's best archers above them and Nessa's ground force blocking the exit. It was not a battle. It was a rout. But Colton was not in the ravine. He was not at the Eastern Pass. He had split off from the Alliance with a small team of 20 wolves, circling wide through unclaimed territory, the same unclaimed territory where Elara had lived for 3 years, and he was heading for the keep. He knew the way. He had been the one to drag Elara to the border when she was expelled. He knew the forest, knew the gaps in the patrol routes, knew that during a battle the keep's guard would be thinned. He reached the keep at noon. The entrance he used was a service tunnel, an old mine shaft that opened into the cellars known to few. He had gotten the location from a trader who worked both sides of the border. His 20 wolves filed in behind him, silent-armed, and moved through the lower levels of the keep like smoke. Elara felt them before she heard them. Her moon-touch sense, the one that read emotion through proximity, detected a wave of hostile intent so sharp it cut through the ambient noise of the wounded wolves like a scream in a quiet room. She straightened from the cot she was bending over and turned toward the door. "Something is wrong," she said. Marin looked up. "What?" "They are inside the keep." The door burst open. Colton stood there with blood on his face that was not his and a sword in his hand, and behind him his wolves filled the corridor. He was a lean man with sharp features and the kind of smile that always looked like it was at someone else's expense. He had been handsome once, or at least she had thought so. Now he looked like what he was, small hungry, reaching for something he had thrown away because he had finally realized its value. "Elara," he said, and his voice was the same, that smooth beta charm that had once made her feel chosen. "Time to come home. I am home." His smile thinned. "You do not get to choose. Pack law says nothing about a wolf who was expelled by her pack and claimed by another alpha. This came from behind Elara. Serafina Voss stepped forward from behind a row of cots, and she held a sword with the ease of someone who had been training with one since childhood because she had. Beatus' daughters learned to fight. You have no standing here, Colton. You forfeited it when you lied about her to save your own reputation. Colton's eyes flicked to Serafina and dismissed her. This does not concern you. Everything that happens in Blackridge concerns me. I am Beta's blood, and you are trespassing. The fight happened fast. Colton's wolves surged forward, and Serafina met them with a fury that belied her polished exterior. Her sword catching the first attacker across the chest and spinning to block the second. Marin pulled the wounded behind overturned cots. Elara's wolf roared inside her. Not grief now, but rage. The pure, protective rage of a wolf who has finally found something to defend. Light erupted from her hands, but not healing light. This was different, silver white but with an edge to it, cold and sharp, and when it hit Colton's wolves, it didn't heal them. It froze them, stopped them in their tracks. Muscles locked eyes wide as if the light had reached into them and found the separation between will and action and widened it to a chasm. Colton stared at her. "What are you?" "I'm moon-touched," she said. And her voice had a resonance now, a harmonic underneath it that was not human. "I bridge separations, I can close wounds, and I can open them, I can mend what is broken, and I can break what is whole. I chose to heal because healing is what I needed. But I had a choice, Colton. I always had a choice." He lunged at her, not with the sword. He dropped the sword and shifted his body, cracking into wolf form. A rangy gray wolf with yellow eyes, and he leaped for her throat. The wall of the healer's wing exploded inward. Not a wall exactly, a window. A massive wolf, black as coal, twice the size of Colton's gray, crashed through the stone-framed window in a shower of rubble and glass and hit Colton mid-leap with an impact that shook the floor. Kael. In full wolf form, his body a weapon of muscle and fury, his amber eyes blazing with a light that matched Elara's own. The fight was brutal and brief. Kael's jaws closed on Colton's neck, and he threw the smaller wolf into the far wall with enough force to crack the stone. Colton shifted back to human form, gasping, bleeding from a wound on his throat that was deep but not fatal. Kael had not killed him. He could have. The restraint was deliberate. Kael shifted back. He stood naked and blood-spattered in the wreckage of the healer's wing, his chest heaving, his eyes still amber bright, and he looked at Elara. "Are you hurt?" "No." He turned to Colton, who was trying to stand and failing, his hand pressed to his bleeding throat. Kael's voice, when it came, was the alpha command, but layered, amplified by something that had never been there before, a silver resonance that came from his proximity to Elara, from the bond that was nearly complete. "You will be taken to the Great Hall," Kael said, and his voice filled every corner of the keep. "You will answer for what you have done, not only today, for all of it." Colton was dragged away by guards who had finally reached the healer's wing. His 20 wolves, still frozen by Elara's power, were carried like statues. The battle ended by late afternoon. The Alliance, leaderless and outmaneuvered, broke and scattered. Blackridge's losses were lighter than they should have been, and every warrior who had been healed by the moon-touched Omega told anyone who would listen that that evening, as the full moon rose over the mountains, Kael and Elara walked into the forest. They walked alone. No guards, no witnesses, just the two of them and the moonlight and the sound of their feet on the leaf-covered ground. They walked to the hollow tree, the one where Asher lay, and they stood before it in the silver light. Elara placed her hand on the bark. Kael placed his hand beside hers. Their fingers did not touch, but the space between them hummed. "I want him to know," she said. "I want him to know that his mother is not alone anymore." Kael nodded. He did not speak. He understood that some things required silence. The moonlight intensified. Elara felt it on her skin like warm water. And the light within her rose to meet it, silver answering silver. And for a moment, the clearing was brighter than day. Her wolf, fully awake, now pressed forward, and Elara let her come, let the shift take her for the first time in 3 years. It hurt, not the physical pain of shifting, which she remembered, but the emotional shock of becoming whole again, of being two in one, of feeling the world through a wolf's senses after years of human limitation. She was white. Her wolf was pure white, which she had not known or had forgotten. Small for a wolf, but luminous, her fur glowing with the same silver light that came from her hands. Kael shifted beside her. His wolf was enormous black with amber eyes that burned in the moonlight. He was terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. And when he pressed his muzzle to her neck, she felt the mate bond complete. Its circuit felt it lock into place with an almost audible click, felt it become something permanent and unbreakable. He bit her. Not gently. The marking bite was primal, his teeth sinking into the junction of her neck and shoulder, and the pain was sharp and bright and lasted exactly 3 seconds before it was replaced by something else entirely. Warmth, connection, the sensation of suddenly being able to feel another heartbeat alongside her own, as if her chest had expanded to accommodate two. She bit him back. Her smaller jaws found the same spot on his neck, and she felt his wolf shudder. Felt the bond deepen, felt herself pour into him and him pour into her until the boundary between them blurred. They shifted back human again, kneeling in the leaves before the hollow tree, both of them marked, both of them bleeding from the neck in matching wounds that were already healing. "Luna," he said. His voice was raw. "My Luna." She pressed her forehead to his. "Say his name. Asher." No hesitation. He said it the way he always said it, with weight and care and acknowledgement. She placed both hands on the tree. The silver light came one more time, gentle now, not healing and not breaking, but simply illuminating. It seeped into the bark and the moss and the hollow place where a linen-wrapped bundle had rested for 3 years. And for a moment, just a moment, she felt something that might have been her son. Not alive, but not gone either. Present, witnessed, known. The light faded, the forest was quiet, an owl called from somewhere in the dark. The tribunal was held the next morning, the great hall was packed. Every wolf in Blackridge who could stand was present, and many who had come from the outer territories to witness. Kael sat on the stone throne at the head of the hall, and Elara sat beside him on a chair that had not been there the day before. It was carved from dark wood, freshly made, and it matched the throne in style if not in size. Colton was brought in. He was healed because Elara had ordered it not out of mercy exactly, but because she wanted him whole when he heard his judgment. She wanted him standing on his own 2 feet with nothing to blame but himself. He stood in the center of the hall, flanked by guards, and he looked around at the sea of faces and found no ally among them. Kael spoke. His voice was even. "Colton of Ashwood, you are charged with unlawful entry into Blackridge territory, with the assault of our healer's wing during a time of war, with the attempted abduction of the Luna of Blackridge." Colton flinched at the word Luna. He had not known about the marking. He looked at Elara's neck, at the fresh scar visible above the collar of her dress, and something in his face collapsed. And Kael continued, "Though it is not within my jurisdiction, I charge you with the abandonment of a mate and the slander that led to her expulsion. I charge you with the fact that she buried her pup alone in a hollow tree in unclaimed territory in the cold with no one to hold her. I charge you with 3 years of grief howls that I heard from my window every full moon, and with the fact that I could do nothing about them because I did not know where she was." His voice had not risen. It did not need to. "The sentence is exile. Not from one pack, from all. You will carry a mark that identifies you as oathbreaker and coward. No pack in the northern or southern territories will shelter you. No alpha will grant you passage. You will live as she lived, alone, in the cold, with nothing." Colton's mouth opened, closed. He had expected death. In some ways, this was worse. Death was an ending. Exile was a continuation. He was taken away. The hall was silent for a moment. And then Nessa, standing by the door with her arms crossed and a bruise on her jaw from the battle, brought her fist to her chest and bowed. "Luna," she said. The word rippled through the hall. One by one, then in waves, the wolves of Blackridge brought their fists to their chests and bowed. "Luna, Luna, Luna." Elara sat in the carved chair and let the word wash over her. And she did not cry because she was done with crying, and she did not smile because a smile would have been too small for what she felt. Instead, she looked at Kael, and he looked at her. And between them, the bond hummed with a steady warmth that needed no words. Serafina was near the back of the hall. She did not bow, she did not need to. She caught Elara's eye and gave a single small nod, the kind of acknowledgement that passes between two people who have reached an understanding. Then she turned and walked out. And Elara let her go because some stories resolve cleanly and some do not. And Serafina's story was still being written. After the tribunal, after the hall emptied and the keep settled into the exhausted quiet that follows, Crisis Elara walked alone to the library. She sat in the chair by the window where the afternoon light came in gold, and she opened the book she had been reading, the terrible one about the princess and the knight that Kael had warned her about. She turned to the last page. She had not read it before. She read it now. It was predictably awful. The knight declared his love in a speech so overwrought it contained the phrase, "My heart is a castle and you are the drawbridge." She snorted. She actually snorted, sitting alone in the library of the keep that was now her home, in the territory of the pack that was now her pack, wearing the mark of the Alpha King on her neck like a brand of belonging. She heard footsteps. She did not look up. Kael appeared in the doorway. He was still in the clothes from the tribunal, but he had loosened the collar and she could see his matching scar, the place where her teeth had claimed him. He leaned against the doorframe. You finished it. I finished it. The knight says my heart is a castle and you are the drawbridge. It is the worst sentence I have ever read. I warned you. You did. She closed the book. She held it up. I want to keep it. It is yours. I want to keep all of them. Every terrible book in this library, and I want you to argue with me about every single one. He crossed the room. He sat on the arm of her chair, too big for it, his weight making the wood creak. He smelled like cedar and wood smoke and the metal tang of old blood that had not quite been washed away. She leaned into him, and he leaned into her. And the mate bond between them pulsed with the slow, steady rhythm of two hearts that had learned to beat in time. Outside the window, the mountain caught the last of the afternoon light and held it like a breath. Somewhere in the forest, in a clearing 4 miles west, an old hollow tree stood with moss covering its opening and a linen bundle inside that would never be forgotten, that would be visited every full moon by a white wolf and a black wolf who stood side by side and said a name into the dark. In the library, Elara turned the page.